ruthless, greedy landlord smirked as he threw a war veteran's frail widow out into the freezing rain, absolutely confident she was completely alone in the world. He was dead wrong, because by sunrise the deafening roar of 1,000 Hell's Angels would shake his corrupt empire to the ground. The house at 424 Sycamore Drive was more than just wood, drywall, and peeling gray paint. For Martha Higgins, it was a museum of a life well lived, a 40-year sanctuary built on love, grease, and quiet sacrifices. Her late husband, Thomas "Tommy" Higgins, had framed the back porch with his own 2 hands. He had planted the massive oak tree in the front yard shortly after returning from the jungles of Vietnam, a young man trying to put down roots in a world that felt entirely unmoored. Tommy had been a combat medic in the Army, a man who earned a Silver Star for pulling 3 severely wounded men out of a burning transport under heavy fire near Deck 2. But to Martha, he was just Tommy the Gentle Giant with engine oil permanently tattooed into the creases of his knuckles. The man who could make a busted carburetor hum like a choir and who loved her with a quiet, fierce devotion until Agent Orange complications finally took his breath away 2 years ago. Since Tommy's passing, Martha, now 68 and battling severe rheumatoid arthritis, lived quietly on his pension and her modest Social Security check. It was just enough to cover her groceries, her medication, and the $850 a month rent they had locked in years ago with the original property owner, an old friend of Tommy's. But 3 months ago, the original owner passed away, and the property was swallowed up by Gable Estates, a massive, aggressive property management firm owned by a man named Richard Gable. Richard Gable was a man who saw neighborhoods not as communities, but as spreadsheets. He was in his mid-40s, always dressed in impeccably tailored navy suits that looked absurd against the backdrop of Bakersfield's working-class streets. He drove a pristine black Mercedes SUV and had a reputation for buying up older blocks, finding legal loopholes to aggressively evict long-term, low-income tenants and bulldozing the lots to build high-density luxury condos. On a freezing Tuesday morning in mid-November, the blow finally landed. Martha was sitting at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of black tea to warm her aching hands, when a heavy, aggressive pounding shook her front door. She pulled her knitted shawl tighter across her shoulders and shuffled to the entryway. Standing on her porch was Richard Gable himself, flanked by 2 burly men in tactical black windbreakers who looked more like private military contractors than property managers. "Mrs. Higgins," Gable said. His voice was smooth, polished, and entirely devoid of warmth. He didn't wait for an invitation. He simply pushed past her, stepping his expensive Italian leather shoes onto her faded floral rug. "Mr. Gable, I sent the rent check on the 1st of the month," Martha said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain firm. "Just like always." "Yes, I received your quaint little check, Martha," Gable replied, looking around the modest living room with undisguised disgust. He ran a finger along the mantel, checking for dust. "Unfortunately, that check no longer covers your occupancy. The city inspectors whom I called naturally have red-tagged this property. They've deemed the electrical wiring entirely hazardous, an immediate threat to life and safety." Martha's heart plummeted into her stomach. "Hazardous? Tommy rewired this entire house himself 15 years ago. It's perfectly safe. The lights don't even flicker." "The city disagrees," Gable said, pulling a laminated sheet of paper from his leather portfolio and slapping it onto her coffee table. It was an official-looking eviction notice stamped in bold reading. "Because it is a severe safety hazard, standard eviction timelines do not apply. Your lease is hereby terminated under the Emergency Habitability Clause. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises before my preservation team arrives to change the locks and board up the windows." "48 hours?" Martha gasped, clutching her chest. "Mr. Gable, please. I have nowhere to go. I don't have family. All my husband's things. 40 years of our life is in this house. You can't just throw me onto the street in the middle of winter." Gable offered a cold, predatory smile. "I assure you, Mrs. Higgins, I can, and I will. Progress doesn't wait for sentimentality. If you aren't out by Thursday morning, my men will physically remove you for trespassing. Have a pleasant afternoon." He turned on his heel and walked out, his men following silently behind him, leaving the front door wide open to the biting wind. Martha collapsed into her armchair, burying her face in her hands. The tears came hot and bitter. She spent the next 24 hours in a state of absolute, paralyzing panic. She called legal aid, but the automated voice told her the wait list for a consultation was 3 weeks long. She called the city housing authority, but the clerk informed her that once a red tag was issued by an inspector, especially one highly friendly with developers like Gable, there was nothing they could do to stop an emergency vacate order. By Wednesday evening, the reality of her impending homelessness set in. The temperature outside had dropped to near freezing, and a cold, sleeting rain began to fall. Martha found herself in the dusty, dimly lit attic, surrounded by cardboard boxes. She was trying to decide which pieces of her 40-year marriage she could carry in 2 suitcases, knowing the rest would be thrown into a dumpster by Gable's goons. In the far corner of the attic, tucked beneath an old patchwork quilt, she found Tommy's old military footlocker. She opened the heavy brass latches. Inside, sitting neatly on top of his carefully folded combat fatigues and his framed silver star, was a heavy, black leather vest. Martha ran her gnarled fingers over the thick leather. On the back, stitched in immaculate, vibrant colors, was the iconic winged death head patch. Above it, the top rocker read, Hell's Angles. Below it, the bottom rocker, California. Most people in their quiet suburban neighborhood had no idea about this chapter of Tommy's life. After Vietnam, before his heart softened and he settled down, Tommy had ridden with the Oakland chapter. He was never one of the wild ones looking for trouble. He was their master mechanic and their fiercely loyal brother. He had saved the lives of several key members during his time as a combat medic in the war, pulling them from the mud when the government had drafted them all into the meat grinder. To the Hells Angels, Tommy Higgins wasn't just a former member. He was royalty. He was a saint wrapped in denim and leather. When Tommy's lungs finally failed him 2 years ago, the club had wanted to throw him a massive biker funeral, but Tommy had requested a quiet, private burial with just Martha. The club had respected his dying wish, but not before the chapter president had visited Martha privately. Martha dug deeper into the footlocker and found a small, black, leather-bound address book. She flipped to the very first page. There, written in bold, thick black marker, was a single name and a phone number, Arthur Big Artie Jenkins. Beneath the number, Artie had written, "For Tommy's girl. Day or night, heaven or hell, you call." Martha looked at the dust settling in the harsh light of the single attic bulb. She looked at the eviction notice crumpled in her pocket. She had always been too proud to ask for help, just like Tommy. But looking at the leather cut, she realized Gable wasn't just erasing her. He was erasing Tommy's legacy. He was throwing Tommy's life into a dumpster. With trembling hands, she picked up her cell phone and dialed the number. The phone rang 4 times. With each ring, Martha almost lost her nerve, her thumb hovering over the red end call button. It was nearly midnight. She was an old woman clinging to a ghost's promise from decades past. Finally, the line clicked open. Heavy, rhythmic background noise bled through the speaker, classic rock music, the clinking of heavy glass, the low murmur of deep voices. "Yeah, who's this?" The voice on the other end was a gravelly, deep baritone that sounded like it had been cured in whiskey and cigarette smoke for 50 years. Is this Arthur Jenkins?" Martha asked, her voice sounding incredibly small and fragile. The background noise suddenly muffled, as if the man had put his hand over the receiver and walked into a quiet room. "Nobody calls me Arthur except my mother, and she's been dead 20 years. Who is this?" "My name is Martha Higgins," she said, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her wrinkled cheek. "I'm Tommy Higgins' wife, Tommy from the Oakland chapter." Tommy's girl," Artie interrupted. A defensive edge in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by a profound, heavy reverence. "Mrs. Higgins, Lord Almighty, we mourned Tommy deep. He was the best brother a man could ask for in the jungle, and a better one on the asphalt. Are you okay, ma'am? Why are you calling so late?" The kindness in the rough man's voice broke the last of Martha's stoicism. She gripped the phone tightly and sobbed. Through her tears, she explained everything. She told Artie about the death of the old landlord, the hostile takeover by Gable Estates, the fake safety hazard report, and the 48-hour eviction notice. "He's coming tomorrow morning, Artie," Martha wept. "He's throwing me out. I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have the money for a deposit on a new place. I'm so sorry to bother you. I know it's been years, but I didn't know who else." "Martha, stop apologizing." Artie's voice dropped an octave, turning into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly focused. It was the voice of a man who commanded an army. "You listen to me very carefully. You don't pack another box. You don't shed another tear for this suit-wearing piece of garbage. You make yourself a warm cup of tea, and you go to sleep. But he's coming at 8 a.m. with his private security. Let him come," Artie said softly. "You just sit tight, Martha. The club owes Tommy a debt that blood and time can never repay. We protect our own. And Tommy's wife. Your royalty. We'll handle Mr. Pessy." "Gable." The line went dead. Martha sat in the attic for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in around her. She didn't know what Artie meant by handle, and a part of her was terrified. But she was too exhausted to fight anymore. She climbed down the stairs, curled up in her bed beneath Tommy's heavy quilt, and fell into a fitful sleep. Richard Gable did not wait until 8 a.m. At 5:30 a.m., while the sky was still a bruised, pitch-black purple and a freezing rain pelted the sidewalks, a heavy tow truck and two black SUVs rolled onto Sycamore Drive. Gable, wearing a waterproof designer trench coat, stepped out, holding a thermos of expensive coffee. He was flanked by 4 massive men from his property preservation team, carrying crowbars, heavy-duty drill sets, and trash bags. They didn't knock. At 5:45 a.m., the front door of 424 Sycamore Drive was violently kicked open, splintering the wooden frame Tommy had built. Martha woke with a scream as heavy boots stomped down her hallway. A bedroom door swung open and Gable stood there sipping his coffee. "Time's up, Mrs. Higgins," Gable said, checking a gold Rolex on his wrist. "Actually, I'm early. I have a busy day of clearing out dead weight, so we're accelerating the timeline." "Get out of the bed. You have no right," Martha cried, pulling the covers up. "It's not even daylight." "My property, my timeline," Gable snapped. He snapped his fingers at his men. "Grab her things. If she doesn't move, physically escort her to the curb. We're boarding this place up right now." It was a nightmare. The men gave Martha barely enough time to throw on a heavy winter coat over her nightgown and slip her swollen feet into rubber boots. They didn't let her pack. They simply started grabbing her cardboard boxes, the ones she had painstakingly filled the day before, and carrying them out into the freezing rain, dumping them unceremoniously onto the wet grass of the front lawn. One of the men grabbed Martha by the elbow. He wasn't gentle. He marched the frail 68-year-old woman out the front door, across the porch, and pushed her onto the public sidewalk. Martha stumbled, catching herself on the icy concrete, scraping her hands. The freezing rain immediately soaked through her thin nightgown, where her coat didn't cover. She looked up, shivering uncontrollably, her boxes of photos, Tommy's old records, her carefully packed kitchenware, all of it was sitting in the mud, getting ruined by the downpour. A few lights flicked on in the neighboring houses. Curtains twitched. Her neighbors, good but frightened working-class people, looked out their windows. But seeing Gable's hulking security men pacing the lawn with crowbars, no one dared to step outside. Gable ruled this neighborhood through fear and litigation. Nobody wanted to be his next target. "You're a monster," Martha whispered, clutching her arms around herself as she sat on a soggy cardboard box containing her winter sweaters. "My husband bled for this country. He built this house." Gable laughed, a short, sharp sound. He walked down the driveway and stood over her, an umbrella held over his head by one of his goons. "Your husband is dead, Martha, and the past doesn't pay the rent," Gable sneered, taking another sip of his coffee. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, tossing it so it fluttered down into a puddle at her feet. "Here, call a cab. Go to a shelter, I don't care. But if you step foot on my grass again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He turned back toward the house, gesturing for his men to start drilling the thick plywood over the windows. Martha closed her eyes, the rain mixing with her tears. She had never felt so utterly, profoundly alone. Artie hadn't come. It was just a phone call, just empty words from an old man. She was truly on her own. But then, the puddle at her feet began to ripple. It was subtle at first, a tiny vibration in the stagnant water. Then Martha felt it in the concrete beneath her boots. A deep, rhythmic trembling. It felt like a minor earthquake rolling in from the east. Gable paused on the porch. He frowned, looking down at his coffee thermos. The dark liquid inside was shaking violently. He looked up, peering down the dark, rain-slicked street toward the main intersection. The vibration grew into a sound, a low, guttural, synchronized thunder. It didn't sound like a truck. It sounded like a dragon waking up. One of Gable's security men dropped his drill, his eyes widening. "Boss, what is that?" "Ow!" The sound swelled, echoing off the narrow houses, rattling the glass in the windows of every home on Sycamore Drive. The ground was physically shaking now. Suddenly, at the end of the block, a pair of intensely bright, glaring LED headlights pierced the morning fog. Then another pair, then 10, then 50. They turned the corner onto Sycamore Drive, a massive, unbroken wall of roaring steel and chrome. It wasn't a dozen bikers. It wasn't even 50. It was a tidal wave, row after row, two abreast, filling the entire width of the street from curb to curb. An endless procession of customized Harley-Davidsons roared into the neighborhood. The sheer volume of the V-twin engines was deafening, a physical force that hit Gable's men like a punch to the chest. Leading the pack was a massive, bearded man riding a customized pitch-black Road King. He wore a heavy leather cut over a denim jacket. On his chest, a patch read, "Treasure Tents, Oakland." It was Big Artie, and he had brought the entire army. The procession seemed endless. Hundreds upon hundreds of motorcycles poured into the residential grid, their engines creating a synchronized, chest-rattling symphony of raw horsepower. They parked across driveways, on the sidewalks, and deep into the street, completely blockading Gable's tow truck and SUVs. There was absolutely no way out. Big Artie kicked down his kickstand. Behind him, a sea of leather-clad men dismounted in eerie, disciplined silence. The only sound left in the freezing rain was the heavy thud of steel-toed boots hitting the wet asphalt and the hiss of hot exhaust pipes cooling in the downpour. These weren't just weekend riders. These were hardened members of the Hells Angels from chapters across California, Oakland, Vallejo, San Jose, and beyond. Word had gone out at midnight. Tommy Higgins' widow is in trouble. And the Brotherhood had answered. Gable's property preservation team, men who made their living intimidating desperate low-income families, suddenly looked remarkably small. The man holding the umbrella over Gable dropped it, backing away slowly until his spine hit the brick facade of the house. Another goon quietly slipped his crowbar behind a rosebush, suddenly wanting his hands completely empty. Bullying a frail 68-year-old woman was a paycheck. Staring down 1,000 Hells Angels was a death wish. Artie walked up the driveway, his massive frame parting the rain. He didn't look at Gable. He walked straight past the trembling millionaire and knelt in the icy mud beside Martha. He gently took off his heavy, dry leather cut and draped it over her shivering, rain-soaked shoulders. The warmth of the heavy leather instantly enveloped her. "I'm sorry we're late, Martha," Artie said, his deep, gravelly voice suddenly incredibly gentle. Traffic on the I-5 was a real bear. Martha sobbed, clutching the edges of the club vest. "You came. You actually came. I told you, Tommy's girl." "Your royalty," Artie smiled warmly, then slowly stood up. The gentleness vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, predatory stare as he finally turned his attention to Richard Gable. Gable was visibly shaking, though he tried desperately to maintain his arrogant facade. He pulled out his sleek smartphone. "This is private property. You are all trespassing. I am calling the Bakersfield Police Department right now, and I will have every single one of you arrested for illegal assembly and terroristic threats." Artie didn't even flinch. He reached into his denim jacket, pulled out a crushed pack of Marlboros, and lit one, shielding the flame from the rain. He took a long drag and blew the smoke directly into Gable's face. "Go ahead and call them, Dick," Artie rumbled. "In fact, I'll save you the trouble." "Hey, Jimmy." From the front of the pack of bikers, a man stepped forward. He didn't look like the rest of the angels. He was wearing a sharp-tailored gray suit beneath a transparent rain poncho, carrying a waterproof leather briefcase. Jimmy the Pen O'Connor was a former prosecutor turned full-time legal counsel for the club's corporate interests. "Jimmy here already spoke to the BPD shift commander about 20 minutes ago," Artie said, taking another drag. "Turns out the police are very interested in what's happening at 424 Sycamore Drive this morning. But not because of us." Gable's smug expression finally cracked. "What are you talking about?" Jimmy stepped onto the porch. Popping the latches on his briefcase, he pulled out a thick stack of documents encased in clear plastic sleeves to protect them from the rain. "Richard Gable," Jimmy began, his voice projecting clearly over the murmur of the crowd. "We spent the entire night doing a little digging into Gable Estates. It's amazing what a team of dedicated paralegals can find when highly motivated by 1,000 angry bikers. We pulled the municipal records for your so-called emergency red tag inspection." Gable swallowed hard, his eyes darting left and right, looking for an escape route that simply didn't exist. The wall of leather and chrome was impenetrable. "You see," Jimmy continued, pulling out a specific document, "a city inspector named Leonard Davis signed off on this emergency habitability clause yesterday afternoon. Funny thing about Lenny, he has a notorious gambling problem. So, a few of our brothers paid Lenny a visit at his home at 3 a.m. this morning just to clarify the details of his inspection." Artie grinned around his cigarette. "Lenny was very cooperative once he woke up. He signed a full, notarized affidavit," Jimmy said, holding up the paper. "He confessed that he never stepped foot inside this house. He confessed that you wired him $10,000 to falsely red-tag the property so you could bypass the standard 60-day eviction notice and throw Mrs. Higgins out onto the street." The color drained entirely from Gable's face. The tablet he was holding slipped from his fingers, plattering onto the concrete porch. "That is a fabricated lie. That was obtained under duress," Gable stammered, his voice cracking. "It was obtained in the presence of a notary public," Jimmy corrected smoothly. "And it constitutes felony fraud, bribery of a municipal official, and, given Mrs. Higgins's age, severe elder abuse. I've already forwarded the affidavit, along with the bank wire transfer receipts Lenny so graciously provided, to the district attorney's office. The police aren't coming to arrest us for trespassing, Richard. They're coming with a felony warrant for you." Silence fell over the driveway, save for the steady patter of the freezing rain. Gable looked at his men, but his preservation team had already completely abandoned him, edging away toward the sidewalk, refusing to make eye contact. Now, Artie stepped forward, towering over the disgraced landlord. "You have two choices, Dick. Choice one. We wait here for the cops, and you go to a maximum security state penitentiary where, let me assure you, the Hells Angels have a very robust and welcoming committee waiting for a guy who throws widows into the freezing rain." Gable whimpered, stepping back. And choice two. "Choice two," Artie growled, pointing a massive, calloused finger at the scattered boxes in the mud. "Your boys there are going to pick up every single one of those boxes. They are going to carry them back inside. They are going to unboard those windows, fix the doorframe they kicked in, and clean up every speck of mud they tracked onto Tommy's carpet. Then you are going to sign the deed of this house over to Martha Higgins, free and clear, as an apology for the emotional distress you caused her. The house is worth $400,000. Gable shrieked. "And your life in San Quentin is worth about a pack of noodles," Artie shot back, his voice like cracking thunder. "Sign the damn deed, or we wait for the sirens." Gable looked at the endless sea of grim, unforgiving faces surrounding him. He looked at Jimmy, who was already holding out a blank quitclaim deed and a pen. Defeated, trembling, and utterly broken, Gable snatched the pen and signed his name on the line. Artie turned to Gable's terrified goons. "You heard the deal. Start moving boxes. If you drop so much as a single teacup, I'm throwing you in the river." The burly men scrambled like frightened children, frantically carrying Martha's belongings back into the warmth of the house, terrified of making a single mistake under the watchful eyes of 1,000 bikers. When the police finally arrived an hour later, they didn't bother the bikers. They walked straight past the wall of Harleys, slapped handcuffs on a weeping Richard Gable, and shoved him into the back of a cruiser for the fraud and bribery charges. Martha sat in her kitchen, a fresh hot cup of tea in her hands. The house was put perfectly back together. Her husband's old brothers had not only fixed the door, but several of them were currently in the backyard, repairing a leak in the roof they had noticed, while others were patching up the driveway. Artie stood in the doorway, Tommy's old leather cut resting comfortably over his arm. He looked at Martha, tipping his head respectfully. "You're never alone, Martha," Artie said softly, placing the signed free and clear deed to the house on her kitchen table. "Tommy's ghost still rides with us, and as long as a single angel draws breath, no one will ever touch this house again." Martha looked out her window at the sea of motorcycles, tears of profound gratitude blurring her vision. The storm had broken, and the morning sun was finally beginning to shine through the clouds, reflecting brilliantly off the endless miles of polished chrome. If this story of ultimate karma and brotherhood gave you chills, hit that like button right now. Share this video to remind the world that true loyalty never dies and that greedy bullies always get what's coming to them. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life drama stories, and leave a comment below letting us know what you think of Big Artie.